Hi everyone, I'm Kate Drabinski, one of our Rockstar coaches here at Ideas on Fire, and I'm here for a brief webinar about dealing with rejection. And we thought it would be a good idea to have this webinar because rejection is so integral to the regular life of all academics, including me and including you, and figuring out how to not get completely derailed by it is really, really important. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint with you right now, and we'll take it from there. One sec, let me get this going. Okay, so today's webinar is about dealing with rejection. I love this picture because look at that poor soul out at the end, all alone. And that's what it can really feel like when you're getting rejected. So on tap today, we're going to start by talking about how important it is to get comfortable with rejection. And then we'll talk about a variety of kinds of rejection that you, if you haven't faced yet, you will most assuredly face in the future. First, we'll talk about dealing with rejection from committees and from faculty members. Then we'll discuss dealing with rejection from fellowship and funding applications, dealing with rejection from publishers, and we'll talk mostly about academic presses, and then dealing with rejection from the job market, which will surely happen to you. And then we'll end by talking about how to establish routines of self-care to work through our rejections. All right, so first, I think it's important to think about rejection as the graduate student's most intimate partner. It's inevitable. And this is really challenging, I think, a lot for those of us who have made it to grad school. We've been the A student, we've been the top girl going through our education, and then we get to graduate school and we just face rejection after rejection after rejection. It's inevitable, and but we're in danger of feeling like it shouldn't happen to us, or it's a sign that we should quit. And we often will let it derail us from the work that we need to do. And I want to encourage us today not to do that. So recognize and honor that you will have feelings, that rejection is normal. I think trying to resist the feeling just makes it worse. So recognize that you're going to have a lot of feelings and you don't need to judge them. They're just going to be there. And rejection and the feelings that accompany it of not being good enough, of not being smart enough, of not being worthy are completely normal, unfortunately. One way I think sort of to help us get comfortable with rejection is also get comfortable with our successes. And to do this, I think it's important to write things down. Write down when things go well, when you get good feedback from your committee, when you have a success in class, when you get a conference presentation accepted. Write those things down. It's kind of like when you read student evaluations and the only one you read is the one bad one in the batch of 30 good ones. And it's really important to write down the successes that you have, just the same way it's important to read the sort of positive things that students say about you, right? So that you can return to that and remind yourself that life is not just rejection, but there are also a lot of wins. It's also, when you're writing those things down, important to write down what you're going to do after you experience rejection. And this can come at the stages of rejection. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. Next thing I'll suggest is that you talk to trusted peers and colleagues about your rejection and the feelings that you have around it. Everyone has been there. Ask others how they deal with that rejection, because you're absolutely not alone. And I think people will have a lot to share, right? So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I do today, but don't be afraid to reach out to others and really articulate the fact that you're experiencing feelings around rejection. All right, so first up, dealing with rejection from committees. And this, there are a number of levels of rejection, I think, at this stage. One is the perceived rejection, the part where the professor that you're working with seems to spend more time with someone else in your department, or the worry that the professor doesn't like you, or they didn't respond to your email within 48 hours, so obviously it means they don't care. Those kinds of what I would call perceived rejections that are perceived that way because they come from our own insecurities that are completely natural, right, given our experiences, but are not actual rejections. Then there's the rejection that's the actual no. right? You ask a faculty member if they can serve on your committee, and they say, I'll think about it, and then they say no. That's a real rejection, but most of what you'll face with professors at your department is a perceived rejection. If you actually are rejected, don't be afraid to ask for feedback. It's the professor's job. You will often find that the committee member that can't serve on the committee, the professor who can't serve on the committee can't do it because they are already overextended, right? For a lot of us, we work in fields and work with faculty members who are tasked with representing entire identity groups on campus, right? When I was in graduate school, there was one African American woman faculty member who mentored almost every woman of color at the university, it seemed. So she was too busy to help with some people's committees, and that's important, and you should feel grateful that the professor can tell you that. When you're asking for feedback, it's really important to ask, can you direct me to others in the field who could work with me? And often they can and will, and they'll make that connect. And one closed door is another open door somewhere else. It's also worthwhile to ask what kind of feedback they might be able to give if you can contact them again. This is part of building your community of mentors and people you will call upon later in your career. So leave those kinds of rejections with what you can take from them, which is often a connection, even if the professor can't work with you. Also, keep a list of other people who you can ask for help when dealing with professors or with troublesome committee members. And think of them as people whose opinions you value, but also the kind of people you get along with. A lot of picking sort of our professors and our committee members has to do with whose work most resembles our own or will be most helpful. But it's also worth thinking about whose personalities you sort of can relate to and work with. So remember that when you're dealing with that kind of rejection, it's often a pathway to another kind of and set of connections. Let's talk about dealing with rejection from fellowship and funding applications. This is another kind of rejection that can feel incredibly damaging because you're asking for support for projects that you think and know are important and that will be the core of your career, and yet you're getting rejected. So it can feel like a rejection of your work and your ideas. The first step here, I think, is to take time to feel your feelings when the rejection comes in. Like let yourself feel the negative feelings surrounding it, and don't judge them. They're totally normal. Have them, the feeling, I guess my work is useless. No one ever, those feelings are totally normal. So go ahead and have them, right? And try not to judge them. At the same time, give yourself a time limit on those feelings. Like, I'm going to take the weekend to feel like no one's funding my work and no one ever will, and my career's over before it started, right? Take the weekend to feel that way. If you're me, watch some reality TV and eat some ice cream and pet my cats. But then you do need to be ready to move on, right? To move to the next step. And the next step is something to do. And I think, it's much easier to do ourselves into feeling better than to feel ourselves into doing better. So the next step is to start doing stuff. And the first thing is to ask for feedback. Ask for feedback from selection committees. They may say, we are not authorized to give feedback, or they'll have some, the committee keeps these things private or something like that. So that could happen. But chances are you can get some feedback from the committee. If they say no, that's fine. You have other people to ask for feedback. Next, go to your professors and mentors. Ask them to look at your application and see if they can see places where it could be strengthened. This is sometimes hard for us to do because it feels like letting people we sort of admire look inside our dirty underwear drawer, right? Like letting faculty see our applications can feel really scary. But it's how we make our applications better. So ask for help from professors and mentors. And then finally, go ahead and ask peers, right? Because your rejection might be somebody else's success, right? Someone else may have gotten the fellowship. Ask if you can see their applications, because it might help you see what you could do better. But ultimately, there are just way more quality projects and quality applications than there are pools of funding. And chances are you got rejected not because your project's not interesting or good or smart, but because there's just, it's kind of a crapshoot at the end of the day. So you just want to move on to the next one. Just send out the next application. And this is going to get, I'm going to repeat this over and over again, but you just got to on to the next one. You just got to be on to the next and just send out the next application. So incorporate feedback that you get from the committee, other professors or peers, and then move on to your next application. When you incorporate feedback, one thing that's dangerous with these cycles of rejection is that we can think we need to change our work so that it better matches the funding priorities of fellowship committees, and that's really dangerous. That's a dangerous road to go down. So don't lose sight of what matters to you about your work, and don't necessarily change your work just to increase the chance of it being funded, right? And that's always a tricky part. But you will eventually find the support that you need, or you'll change your goals, but don't change your project necessarily based on a few rejections from funding committees. All right, I want to talk now a little bit about dealing with rejection from publishers. A lot of us are sending out articles sooner and sooner. And so that means we're getting, earlier and earlier in our career, and we're often getting rejections at a much higher rate. I want to start this section by telling everybody that we all get those publishing rejections. They are important. They push us to make our work better. They're just part of what it means to be in an academic community. So it's really important not to let the rejections freeze us from and keep us from continuing to put our work out there. I remember when my dissertation advisor, Judith Butler, told me that her first publication was rejected. I think it was something like 23 times before it got published. Now she has absolutely no problem publishing, but all of us have this struggle, so it's not unique to you. So I think the steps of dealing with rejection from publishers are much like any kinds of rejection, right? First, take a few days away from the project. The rejection can be, and the reader's notes, the review notes can be really, really scary, right? So take a few days, feel your feelings, but then you've got to come back to it. Don't let more than a couple days pass before you get back into the project. The more time that passes, the more you can sort of wallow in the rejection and put the article in a drawer and leave it there. And that's not what you want to do, right? Part of building an academic career, or any kind of career that requires writing, is to continue to put your writing out there and leave it open for critique and engagement. So after you've taken a few days from the project, return to the feedback and try to read it dispassionately. And this is so much easier said than done. It's ridiculous. So one thing that you can do is have a friend read it with you, right? Or read it and sort of help summarize it for you, because our eyes often go to the most negative thing and fixate there, or fixate on a place where we get defensive and we're not open to the kind of feedback we're getting. And that's something that I think peers and colleagues can help us with, can sort of help us with the distance that's necessary. Peer review, when it works well, when it works right, actually makes our work stronger and helps push the field forward. That's in an ideal world, that's what it does. A lot of times the way it reads, though, is incredibly personal and attacking, right? Because the kind of petty fights that happen in academia are often fought out in the peer review. So it can be pretty scary to read that stuff. So if that's how you feel, it's how I feel, have somebody with you to help read it and pick out what is actually useful, right, from the feedback for you. If you get a revise and resubmit, first celebrate. That's great. That means that the publisher is genuinely interested in your argument and in your work, and that's a really good thing. So decide, but the first thing you need to do when you get that revise and resubmit is decide if it's worth it. Is the work that they're asking you to do, is it work that you don't want to do? Does it ask for revisions that would change your argument in ways that don't feel right? Right? Remember, this is your work and these are your ideas that are going to be out in the world. So it's important that that you stay sort of true to what you want. But deciding if it's worth it is about deciding, do I have the time? Should I be writing my dissertation chapters, or should I be working on this, making this article better for this journal? And then also, does it feel intellectually sort of honest to myself to do the work that is being requested to revise it? If you decide it's worth it, make a plan and put it on your calendar about how you're going to address the revisions, and have it be a short timeline, right? And so that you can get that back out. When I say short timeline, it depends on what your work life looks like, but if you can get it turned around in a month, that would be really great. And then it's back on somebody else's desk, right? So you take the rejection and you turn it in to something that's much more likely to become an acceptance. What if your article's just straight up rejected? It's happened to me before. It will happen to you. Ask for feedback, right? So you get your reviewers' comments, look at them, but then ask for people in your field or in your department, your colleagues, if the feedback seems fair, right? And is what's useful about this feedback, and did I just send it to the wrong journal? Because that's often the case, that a rejection is a sign that you sent it to the wrong journal, a journal that either just recently published something that's related to your research, that your research is a little outside their parameters, the style's not quite what the journal tends to publish. It might be a journal issue, right? So working with other faculty members can help you decide if maybe you just need to send it somewhere else, and then decide where to send it next. And what journal is perhaps would be a better fit, and then just send it. And that's a really important last step. You just got to send it, put it somewhere else, right? Make some revisions that you feel would make it stronger, and then get it off your desk and onto somebody else's again. And trust that you will find a place that's right for your voice, right? Where there's a good match, right? Eventually, Judith Butler did publish that first article, and you will too. So it's sort of about, being willing to send it out again and again and again. All right, let's talk. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about rejection on the job market. Remember, rejection is your most intimate partner on the road of the job market. And this is true whether you're staying in the academic job market or you're looking at alt-ac careers, because there isn't a job market that is easy and that doesn't include rejection. So wherever you decide to sort of find your job, rejection will be on the road with you. It can sometimes be helpful just to look at the numbers, not to intimidate yourself into thinking, oh my gosh, I'll never land a job in these conditions, but to remind yourself that it is a crapshoot and that you can control what you can control, getting your application package in, getting that as tight as possible. And getting it in on time and things like that. But after that, there's not a whole lot you can do to control it. So the rejections will roll in. And like any kind of rejection, give yourself space to feel your feelings without judgment. But then it's time to turn around and ask for feedback. If you go on the job market and you have a season where you don't get any interviews, first, you're in really good company. That's incredibly common. So it doesn't mean that your work isn't good or you're not smart or a good teacher or something. It's part of what being on this job market is for a lot of us. So let yourself feel those feelings and know you're not alone. But then it's time to turn around and ask for feedback. You can ask for feedback from selection committees. Chances are they're not going to give you much because human resource departments want those job deliberation conversations to stay quite private. But it's worth asking. And then you need to turn to your professional and peer networks and ask for direct feedback. If a lot of us are in graduate programs where we don't get a lot of training about how to go on the job market, how to write a good cover letter, what's a teaching philosophy, how to position yourself in relation, to your identity and to fields and things like that. So it's sometimes worth reaching out to other, to other places, asking particular questions. Ideas on Fire, next year we plan to do more conversations, have more conversations about the practical tips about producing job market materials. But getting help with preparation of job market materials can be really worth it, right? To help make the best package possible. In the end, though, because of the way the job market works, rejection is going to happen no matter how tight your application package is. So one thing that you'll do, and this gets easier with time, is to practice letting go of the applications, right? Your first year on the job market, every application feels like a fantasy. Like, oh, what if I got this job and I lived in Montreal and they have a bike share and get to learn French, right? You have that fantasy about every job application you send out. More practice you have, the more you understand how integral rejection is to the job market, and you start. I think it's good to sort of cultivate an attitude that each application is more like a lottery ticket than a potential life change, right? So that you're sort of entering the lottery as many times as possible. So just send them out, right? Get that package together, make the tiny tweaks for each package, and know that it gets easier, right? But every application you send out is like a lottery ticket in the job lottery, and you only need to get one job, right? But so you got to get a lot of lottery tickets. So dealing with rejection on the job market is, I think, an ongoing process, and one that for Rockstar is something we can talk about in our Slack groups and support each other through this, because it can get really, really disheartening, especially as multiple years go by. And for that, I wanted to end today by talking some about establishing self-care routines to get through the difficulties of rejection and in all of these parts of our careers. So the first thing to do is to really establish support systems, and these can be professional support systems, therapists, counselors. I'm a big proponent of therapy, and if you have student health insurance, it is often covered under that. So having a kind of professional support while you go through these periods of intense rejection can be really helpful. So that kind of therapeutic help is important. I think also personal support systems, friends who've been there. It's often helpful to have friends who are not in academia, who can offer some perspective, but also friends who are inside of academia and understand the particular vagaries of how it feels when your work is so much part of your identity and who you are, right? Who can understand that. And then when I say professional support systems, I mean support systems within your professional life, like the committee members who are going to go to bat for you, who are going to be there for you. Get a couple of folks lined up who are really going to be your support system. And then another thing I think is important is to practice letting go of expectations and this idea that you and your work are the same thing. I think academic rejection feels so particularly damaging, largely because the ways that our work is part of who we are, right? So for a lot of scholar activists, our academic work is integral to the ways we're trying to change the world. So to be rejected around those things does a particular kind of psychological damage. So one thing we can do is disentangle those things, right? And we teach this in, a lot of us in our classes, and we write about this in our work, this idea that the individual and the social structure are not the same things. And the social structure that produces things like poverty and inequality and is separate from who individual people are. But when we're in the midst of it, in terms of our own sort of structural issues facing academia that create a scarcity of jobs and an overabundance of qualified workers, right? That's a structural problem. But individually, we can still feel the sort of shame and pain at the rejection, right? So practicing remembering those differences and letting go of the idea that the rejection is somehow a rejection of us is I think can be really important as part of self-care. So doing something that we already do well, which is think through things in a critical way, and applying it to our own situations can sometimes help get us some critical distance between our own rejection and a system that's set up for us to fail. And then finally, trust that practice makes better when it comes to rejection. There's so much rejection in academia. You get lots of times and chances to practice sort of dealing with it. And while that's a bummer, it also means that we get better at it. And for people who've had a lot of academic success, which you've had if you've gotten to graduate school, this, just be ready for it to take some time to get better at rejection, but you'll have plenty of practice. A few resources for moving forward and thinking about rejection. There are a number of past Ideas on Fire webinars that you might find useful. I've listed them here. Working well with advisors can help you deal with rejection from other academics. Building your professional network is an important webinar that can help you think about how to get a wide variety of people on your team. This can help when working through rejection. And then our very first webinar was on self-care at the end of the semester and has a lot of great tips for self-care that can help sort of ease some of the pain of rejection. There are a lot of blog resources at Ideas on Fire as well that can help you tilt the numbers in your favor, right? So that rejection is less likely. So take a look at some of our blogs. Remind yourself that rejection happens to everyone. That can be somewhat soothing when you think about the part where the people you admire the most in the field were also really rejected. That's just part of the show. And just keep applying, right? Keep sending out the applications. It makes getting rejected easier. And it also tilts the numbers in your favor ultimately. So I think the most important thing when dealing with rejection is to not let it stymie you from sending out the next round of applications, because that's how we do ourselves into feeling better. All right, so that's the, hold on one second. Sorry, small hiccup there. So that's the end of today's webinar on dealing with rejection. We'd love to see some of you in the Rockstar group to talk through the emotional issues of rejection that we all face. And until then, have a wonderful day. Thank you.